All right. So this is a joint presentation from the Department of Natural Resources as well as the Nebraska Emergency Management Agency. Three of us presenting today. Myself, I'm Adele Phillips. I'm a flood mitigation planner with the Department of Natural Resources. I'm also a certified floodplain management specialist or certified floodplain manager. We also have Chelsea Harris, who's the head of the emergency management program, and then the deputy, Erica Wirtz, and they'll be presenting the second half of this presentation. Okay, our agenda today, we're going to go over some flood mitigation concepts. These are actions you can take, just showcasing a few of my favorites. Then I'm going to discuss some planning resources and some financial resources that you can access. And then we're going to pivot to NEMA, who's going to go over their hazard mitigation grant program, open grants that we've got available, and how to submit your notices of interest. We're here today to talk about flooding and mitigating that flood hazard. Floodplains are inherently hazardous. Flooding occurs across the state. We have different levels of risk of flooding across the state, but it is a statewide issue. It's the most frequently reported hazard in Nebraska, followed by drought. And in the span of a 30-year mortgage, a home in a special flood hazard area has a 26% chance of flooding. Now, we often think, oh, 100-year storms. Oh, one storm every 100 years, right? Like that's all I need to worry about. But it's actually a greater frequency than that in terms of alone. And we also know that climate models are showing that Nebraska is getting wetter across the state. Our spring season in particular is getting wetter, while our summers are getting a little drier. Our research is also showing us that our storms are increasing in frequency. That means more often. They're also increasing in scale and intensity. It's like more water in less time. And they're decreasing in predictability. Like it's these, weather is not following the patterns that we've grown accustomed to or built our research on. And we are adjusting, but the predictability or our ability to predict them is lessening a little bit. And it's already been, this is a trend that's already been happening. Between 1958 and 2012 in Nebraska, the amount of precipitation we received during the heaviest storm events has already increased 16%. So this is like an old statistic. This is data that was measured from 1958 to 2012. We're not even considering the more recent decades in that. All right, let's move on. This is a picture of the problem. And another way to talk about it, on the right, you see this triptych of how we have a river, a diagram of a river. A rainstorm happens. The river is able to flood or swell to the bounds of the floodplain. And then when those waters pass through, the river shrinks again, but it's got some different meanders. It's moved a little bit, but it stayed within that floodplain. But it had that natural dynamic allowed. Well, when we encroach with our own development, so this is the triptych B here, we've straightened that channel. We've taken out those meanders. That means we've made it so the water is flowing faster. And we've built our homes near it, so there's less ground available to capture and store and slow the water. There's also more pavement, which is causing runoff. And so then we have a storm event, and we've got a channel that is just flooding our new urban area and causing much more damage than would have been had we not impinged upon that naturally dynamic space. So why should we do anything? Well, when we act to reduce flood hazard, our communities benefit. Like, we not only safeguard our property and loved ones and our livelihoods, we improve our quality of life. Um, we preserve nature and let it do its things that support us. We also have financial benefits. We have lower flood insurance payments. Um, our economy benefits indirectly uh, through investment in flood mitigation. Um, FEMA has a statistic that every dollar spent on flood mitigation actually saves $7 in loss. And we already know that every dollar in a community actually circulates 3 times within that community. And these factors overall then just elevate your community's resilience, your ability to roll with the punches, you know. So when we're thinking of flood mitigation, think of the whole health of your community and how we can all benefit. I'm going to now shift to what we can do. We've got options, and I like to think or encourage everyone to think about mitigation, flood mitigation, in terms of watersheds, sponges, and puzzle pieces. I don't know if anyone thought that was cheese. I hope it looks like a sponge. So on the left, that's a diagram of a watershed. You know, we've got our little fingers of tributaries and streams or roadway ditches on those lighter blue lines, and those all combine to form our rivers, where most of our major along which most of our major developments and communities occur. So when we're thinking about these mitigation actions, take this watershed perspective where the watershed is a network. It requires different scales and mixtures of mitigation actions. The ones we prefer, and this is where the sponge comes in, are actions that capture and sequester the rain where it falls. If we can get the rain to soak in where it lands, we've got less major infrastructure we've got to design for further downstream. And then the puzzle piece comes in with, you're not going to come up with a one-size-fits-all solution in this watershed. You're going to have to assemble a collection of alternatives that fit together and achieve flood hazard mitigation. So it's not that you just can't do dams or levees all throughout a system, but you know, restoring a wetland not going to work everywhere either. You need to figure out your appropriate actions as allowed and you know, come up with a rich palette of tools for this watershed. Later on, I'm going to be showing you mitigation actions that have the smallest footprint, that have the fastest project design, that require less operations and maintenance, less land acquisition, faster cost, so faster construction, and so overall have lower cost. I've got one more image that I want you to keep with you to help you understand flooding watersheds. This is a hiking trail. I think it's Mesa Verde. Imagine yourself going up that path. You know, it's got a lot of switchbacks. It's going to be tiring. Imagine yourself not having that path and just trying to take a straight shot up that slope. That is a lot of work. That is steep compared to your switchback. So if you're thinking about water and how we want to slow the flow and get the rain to stay where it lands and not develop those destructive forces, we want to take the blue path, right? That's slower, it lets various it lets us derive various benefits from the water as it takes this longer, shallower, less steep path from the top to the bottom. Water that takes the blue path is going to build up a lot of speed. It's going to cause a lot of scouring and damage. So if you can bear with me and take that image with you, I appreciate it. All right, and what we're also trying to do, we've got a strong conventional practice of stormwater management where we try to collect, convey, and detain the water through various concrete construction. This serves a certain purpose. We are overwhelming these systems though, and we need to come up with diversity of alternatives. We cannot keep upsizing our concrete infrastructure. We need to have a diversity of options that reduce the load on that infrastructure. All right, I want to do a brainstorming activity. I want to take 1 minute and I want you to list in the chat at least 3 flood mitigation strategies that you can think of. And it's okay if you repeat others. Okay, we've got a brave soul here. Thank you, Annette. Wetland mitigation, detention ponds, dam. Levee, dry proofing structures, elevating structures, dam. Thank you. Stream setback ordinance, elevation and detention basin, residential acquisition, wetland development, drainage convenience. There's no wrong answers here, folks. Anyone else? It's buyouts, channel floodplain improvements, absorption planning. Awesome. Okay, it's been a minute. Good job. I'm excited to see the diversity of the responses. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly, I think you guys have the idea. I'm going to quickly go through some of my favorite examples here, and then we'll pivot to the funding. Okay, agricultural solutions. You know, the upstream, we've got an opportunity upstream in a watershed where flooding is really not a problem. We have a lot of opportunity to intervene in ways that benefit the downstream communities and reduce the loads on their systems. Here we have, this is an NRCS project site. It's a before and after photo where the field on the left had a lot of erosion issue. They implemented a grass waterway, and now they are not losing that topsoil. They're also keeping water in their fields. They're increasing that soil moisture, right, which is going to help their crop yield. This is another NRCS example. It was this was from a presentation by Verlin Barnes. He retired from the NRCS Missouri River Basin coordinator position recently, but he had so much information about actions that can be taken to reduce downstream flooding based on agricultural practices. So here, as a result of we have 2 fields, one on the right, one on the left, the roadway in the middle. They've been subject to different management practices as listed on either side of the screen. So here we see that as a result of those farming practices listed, the field on the left, and they've just had the same rain, the field on the left had an infiltration rate of 6 inches per hour, while the other one on the right is only captured 0.6 of an inch per hour. Now, if each of these fields was a quarter section or 160 acres, then there were over 20 million gallons of water flowing off of the right-hand field on the left. Now, that's 20 million gallons of water that the downstream ditches, culverts, bridges, streams, and rivers needed to handle, that the field on the left was holding on to. All right, moving on. Road solutions. Bioswales can be an alternative to our concrete trapezoidal channels in places. They slow water, they clean the water, they sequester stormwater runoff from roads. Hey, they even provide habitat for our native biodiversity. So win-win. They're aesthetic also. Here's an example from Lincoln. It's P Street. Not long ago, well, I mean, it's been many years at this point, but they did a complete street project and created these bump outs that now handle, that have rain gardens and manage runoff while creating safer pedestrian crossings and a more comfortable streetscape as a whole. So image on the left is the same intersection as the one on the right, but now it's just a nicer street space as well as a more ecological one. Here is permeable paving. On the left, conventional asphalt. On the right, they're dumping water out of a truck to show how quickly that water is being absorbed through that permeable paving. You know, this might not be appropriate for roadways, but it's a great option in all our paved parking lots. They do not need to be producing the runoff that we could have conventionally been seeing. You know, probably don't see a lot of this, but of course, when you have a green roof, you can then not only reduce your urban heat island effect and reduce your heat and cooling loads on a home, but it also helps capture and slow rain. Here's another residential solution. The downspout on the left is sending water right into the storm sewer system. The one in the middle there, it's got a little bit of a rain garden swale. You know, they're watering their lawn. They're slowing things down a little bit before it heads into that stormwater sewer system. You know, the city of Lincoln has a grant program where homeowners can get some money to fund the cost of doing a little garden intervention, such as the one shown in the middle of the screen here. Another flood mitigation, this isn't a natural system sort of one, but installing backflow prevention devices keeps sewer backup from happening in folks' basements due to heavy rain events. So, but you know, maybe your community wants to do a program where they do a cost share or provide the installation of these devices to homeowners. And we'll go on to elevations, buyouts, relocation. Picture on the left, home elevation. Now, you know, the cost of repairing a garage space is much less to the property loss and repair costs of a living space or kitchen. And this home elevation allows people to stay in their community on their land. You know, it's not so disruptive of a community's fabric or a person or a family's sense of space as a buyout or relocation might be. But let's keep all options on the table and look at buyouts and relocation. When communities buy out, you know, repetitively flooded properties, they can actually create additional green space for their community, convert it into recreational open spaces, and reduce the degree of flood damage that surrounding developed areas receive, because now you've got this open space that's allowing the floodplain to perform as it needs to, allowing it to slow and sequester water. So I hope all of you are aware of the city of Beatrice's long-standing effort to buy out properties and reduce flooding costs in their community. It's been highly successful. Here's a habitat promoting solution. Instead of storing water underground, underground on surface is probably just going to have some like grass and a thin layer of dirt on top of it. Turn that into a recreational facility or opportunity for your community. Increase the green space, increase the habitat. These multitude of benefits are achieved with this shift in approaches. And this is a favorite idea of mine. Nobody listed leaky dams as a strategy, but I've got here we've got an image of a more these are both actually wooden structures, but the idea is that they let the typical flow go underneath or through this structure. It's just in times of higher flow, then it flows and holds back some of that water. So like these logs across the channel here, there's actually a gap where the stream just normally just flowing underneath it with no obstruction. And then in the right, this low pasture area. So these are actually interlocking wooden planks. They let a certain amount of water go through all the time. And then when you've got a heavy rain, it collects it, backs it up just a little bit, but then lets it continue to flow over. So it's just like a metering device. All right, so that's the end of those. But there's things you can do with your codes and your zoning approaches. You can do some strategic growth planning as your flood mitigation strategy. Change your zoning regulations, implement early warning systems. You can do education and awareness events. Aquifer storage and recovery is one I didn't talk about. Again, it's another infrastructure, and just floodplain restoration, getting nature back to nature. If you want more ideas, there's all kinds of guides out there. There's one here on the right from Department of Housing and Urban Development. There's a handful from FEMA in here. Engineering with Nature is this great 3-volume atlas produced with the Army Corps of Engineers. And then I'm going to talk more about our own state flood hazard mitigation plan, which we just completed in 2022, which sounds further away than it feels, being the project manager on that. But anyway, I just want you to be aware of this great resource that we put together for the state of Nebraska. It has a huge amount of data. We've got tons of maps in there that allow counties to know exactly their level of risk and the type of risk. We've also got all kinds of mitigation action ideas in there, and these practice sheets, which are at the back, and the idea is that a floodplain administrator can take this practice sheet to their local community officials and just talk about these ideas without having to feel like they need to be an expert or put together a bunch of research. Just copy these pages. And then in the back, we also have all kinds of data. If you need to know how much of your power infrastructure is exposed to flooding hazard, it's here in this chart, or roads or critical infrastructure. What's the value of the agriculture land in your area that's exposed to flooding? It's in these charts. So we have data for everywhere where we have digital mapping of flood hazard. Okay, and moving on, financial resources. So again, the puzzle analogy. Oh, and thank you, Michelle. She's placed the flood hazard mitigation plan on the website, or the website link in the chat. Thank you. So again, we're back on that puzzle analogy. I recommend that people, or advise that folks you're not going to find like this one fund. Typically, you're not going to find this one fund that covers everything, like the whole project concept, everything you want. You're probably going to need to piece together a few sources to get that, to actually complete this project. You're going to need to use various financial tools. Don't just look at grants. Consider bonds, consider revolving loan funds, consider private foundations, and maybe you set up a regional fee program. Maybe you consider a public-private partnership. You know, maybe there's a major employer in your community that has some workforce housing that is susceptible to flooding, and maybe they want to reduce that flooding and they want you to work with them. So consider a variety of options. Pivoting to those grant and loan sources, we're going to talk, and NEMA especially is going to talk about the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, the BRIC program, or Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, as well as we're going to talk about the Flood Mitigation Assistance Grants. But also in the state, we've got the Land and Water Conservation Fund that's administered through the Game and Parks Commission. You can use that to support the creation of parks and outdoor recreation facilities as part of your flood mitigation. We've got a Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund that you can use to support your wastewater treatment facilities and sanitary sewer collection systems. If part of your mitigation project is to rehabilitate a waterway, you can inquire with the Nebraska Riparian Vegetation Management Task Force to help you eliminate and deal with the invasive species that have clogged the flow. There's NRCS that has a whole host of programs and resources available. They've got EQIP, that's the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. They've also got the Watershed and Flood Prevention Operations Program that helps local governments restore watersheds up to 250,000 acres. We've seen a lot of WFPO projects in Nebraska. Let's do more. There's CDBG grants available through the HUD. These are great because they're actually very flexible in use, so long as it's demonstrated that low to moderate income residents can benefit from the project. There's rural development funds, water environment program. There's a community facilities component of rural development. And the EPA has EPA has a grant called Environmental and Climate Change Grant, Community Change Grant. So they're trying to help communities be resilient against our changing climate trends. So there's opportunities there. Flooding is something that's being affected by climate change. There's also the Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act, or WIFA. And they also provide just technical advice on water regarding stormwater. So you can reach out to the EPA for their free technical advice. DNR also provides free technical advice, by the way, on a variety of topics. Anyway, I've also listed 3 foundations. NFWF, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, is nationwide. Nebraska Community Foundation, across Nebraska only, and then look at transportation grants. There's active transportation grants that can help create community recreation in your flood mitigation projects. Just again, don't look for those silver bullets. Look for strategic relationships and things that you can piece together. And I'll be wrapping up here. We're going to shift now to NEMA and DNR resources. We deal with 4 grant buckets. Typically, we only have 3 available, but this year is special, and we will have availability or access to FMA SWIFT current funds. And the key differences are that the HMGP and the SWIFT current funds, they're outlined in red because they're related or triggered or enabled by disaster declarations. The BRIC and the FMA grants, not related to the disaster declarations. Those funds are annually available. DNR, the flood mitigation section, we administer the FMA and the FMA Swift Current grants. NEMA administers HMGP and BRIC. So if you ask either of us about, we'll send you to the right place. So don't worry too much about that division. And another thing, just same for grants. They've got a lot of similarities as to what they'll fund, but they aren't all identical. If you've got some ideas, just reach out to our departments. We'll help you figure out which grants you're eligible for, which grants might be the best fit. So like FMA, Swift Current, FMA, they're linked strongly to benefiting flood insurance or structures that are protected by flood insurance, and reducing the claims on those flood insurance structures. FMA, you'll notice, isn't going to support code and standards adoptions, but HMGP will allow that to be within 5% of the project scope. Some other distinctions: FMA, you're not going to do warning systems, but for BRIC, HMGP, you can. The infrastructure, not an FMA thing. Anyway, if you have any questions, this isn't a perfect table. Obviously, I have a lot of question marks. Those are things that would need clarification. So with that, similar to what I've covered before, lots of puzzle pieces. Think of making connections, synergistic relationships, form partnerships, start small, fund projects in pieces or phases, and do your research, tell the story of your community, and demonstrate earlier successes. And in Nebraska, we do have communities that have been identified as high risk, low income, or high vulnerability. You can leverage that information to reduce your cost share obligations, and to get points to be more competitive. So don't be afraid to say that you have need. And there's a whole bunch of data there.
All right. Can you guys see and hear me all right?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Awesome. It's going to be just me for now. Chelsea got stuck in an interview. I'm hoping she'll duck into the room here in the next couple minutes, but if not, I'm afraid you're just stuck with me. Hi, everyone. All right, so I'm the Deputy State Hazard Mitigation Officer for Nebraska. And obviously, per the slide that you see, this is the hazard mitigation team for Nebraska at NEMA. Want to go ahead and... All right. So as Adele was saying, a lot of our grants cross over with DNR, and I'll be mostly talking about the HMGP grant and the BRIC grant. All of our grants are under the Hazard Mitigation Assistance, which is through the Stafford Act. I did want to point out that this is different from the public assistance hazard mitigation. Sometimes they kind of get intertwined and confused among people. Public assistance is a completely different thing from hazard mitigation. So I just wanted to point that out because there's very different rules. Unlike a lot of the other assistance, like public assistance, when a disaster happens, hazard mitigation projects can be implemented statewide. They're not just specific to the areas that were hit by the disaster. So that is something that is a little unique. And we can also fund projects that involve both damaged and non-damaged facilities and infrastructure. If you want to go ahead to the next slide, please. And kind of like Adele was saying, you know, we've got a lot of flooding and tornadoes and drought and wildfires and things that happen in Nebraska, and they've been increasing more and more over the years. So these are obviously the most common types of things that we look at. Under the hazard mitigation grants, these are the four kind of main grants but I'm mostly just going to talk about the HMGP program and the BRIC program. HMGP is a disaster dependent grant, whereas BRIC is not. It's an annual funding. So for the hazard mitigation grant program, like I said, it's open to the entire state, not just the impacted areas. It is managed by the Hazard Mitigation Unit here at NEMA, and the funding becomes available after a federally declared disaster. There's also the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program post-fire grant. I'll briefly mention it, but I'm not going to talk a lot about it just because it doesn't become available very often, and it's a little more restrictive than regular HMGP. While it can technically be available statewide, it's designed to focus on the areas that have been hit by wildfires. So that's one thing that kind of makes it a little different from the normal hazard mitigation grant program. And also the other thing that can make it a little more restrictive is that its primary function for each grant program has to have fire mitigation specifically as its main objective. And then for the BRIC program, that's the one that comes annually. And there's essentially two pots of money. There is the state allotment, and then there's the national competition. And really the difference is just project size. Any project that's over $1 million automatically goes to the national competition so that it doesn't eat up the state allocations. So there's pros and cons to that, obviously. Going to national competition means there's more money available, but it also means you're competing with the rest of the country for those funds. So next slide, please. Currently, this is the list of open grants we have. We actually had another one that could be added to this slide that was just declared the other day. So there would be an additional one at the bottom there. I believe it is disaster 4808. And it was, like I said, just declared the other day. So that's why it's not on the slide. So apologies there. Combined, all of our grants contribute an estimated $71 million, which is exciting. Next slide, please. So, like I said, currently we have 3 hazard mitigation federally declared disasters, also, sometime in late fall or early winter, we're also expecting our next round of BRIC funding, the NOFO, Notice of Funding Opportunity, to drop sometime. So that's coming up as well. So currently we have 4 potential funding opportunities available right now. Now, if anybody present in the lecture has any potential ideas for hazard mitigation projects, now is the time to submit a notice of interest or NOI because we have those funding opportunities available right now. And I'll kind of touch a little bit more on that in a moment. Next slide, please. All right. So, and I know Adele kind of touched on this a little bit already. Generally, the types of projects that we can fund through hazard mitigation include things like bank stabilization, flood reduction, the wet and dry flood proofing, retrofitting, sirens, safe rooms, generators, hazard mitigation planning actions, acquisition projects, things like that. Next slide, please. And then these are kind of examples of what cannot be funded via hazard mitigation. So anything that is not specifically designed to reduce risk, either to structures or people. Oops, sorry, I hit a button on my computer. We'll make that go away real quick. Okay. Any project work that has already physically started. So if you start a project and then decide you want our help funding it, we can't fund anything that's already been started. The project has to be approved before you can break ground, so to speak. Any activities that are dependent on other actions, like if it's not a standalone project, like we have a hazard mitigation project that we want to implement, but it's dependent on this other project that has nothing to do with this hazard mitigation project, we can't do that. It has to be a standalone project by itself. Anything that's meant to just be like decorative or just improve a community without the intention of it actually reducing or mitigating any kind of disaster or anything like that, we can't do that. The mitigation portion has to be front and center of any project. Anything that is associated with a facility or land owned by another federal entity, we can't do anything like that. Obviously, there's a lot more activities that can't fit on one slide. So if you ever have any questions about something that could or could not be potentially funded by a hazard mitigation project, please don't hesitate to reach out to us or to DNR about questions. Next slide, please. All right, and since I mentioned hazard mitigation planning activities, one thing that's kind of unique to Nebraska that not a lot of other states do is most of our hazard mitigation plans are sectioned by the natural resource district. So I just wanted to show a map of all the natural resource districts in Nebraska. So most of the communities, instead of having their own individual hazard mitigation plans, are usually participating in a multi-jurisdictional plan that's usually divided by the natural resource district. So again, if you're wanting to join a hazard mitigation plan and you have questions about that, you can always reach out to someone on my team or to DNR as well. So if you're interested in applying for a hazard mitigation grant, whether you have like a concrete project already planned out or even just kind of like an idea, we tell everybody to fill out an NOI or notice of interest. When you fill those out, they go into our database and we retain them for when a funding opportunity arises. So like I mentioned earlier, right now we have 4 potential funding opportunities available. So if you have an idea that you would like to implement for a hazard mitigation project, now is the time to submit an NOI. Regardless of any specific grant type, whether it be the annual BRIC thing or hazard mitigation that's disaster dependent, fill out an NOI regardless. And then just one more thing I want to point out is that the NOI is not the grant application itself, because we've had some confusion on that in the past. So what you're going to want to do is go to our website and you're going to want to click on the HMA notice of interest form. We recently updated our process. It's all electronic and automatic now. So next slide, please. It's a fillable application. You can attach any supporting documents. You can include as much detail as you can or want to include. Usually the more detail you can provide, the better. But the nice thing about the NOI is even if you don't have the project fully worked out down to the details, you don't have to spend hours and hours putting that time into filling out an NOI. We added a little box, so if you want to retain a copy of the NOI for yourself, you just have to check that. And then once you submit it, it just automatically uploads into our database, so you don't have to email anything to us. Now, if you have any questions about it or you want to confirm it was received, etc., you can always reach out to one of us just to confirm that we did receive it. Next slide, please. And then when funding opportunities arrive, and then usually at least once a year, we collect all the NOIs. Well, I shouldn't say once a year, scratch that. When the funding opportunities arise, what we do is we go through all of the NOIs collectively and make sure that they meet like a general feasibility and eligibility. And then we present them to the governor's task force for selection. And if your NOI is selected, then you are contacted and invited to submit a formal application for whichever grant funding opportunity. For the HMGP or the disaster-prone ones, we would provide you with the application. For BRIC, you would have to go through the FEMA Go website. But either way, you are notified if the NOI is selected for funding, or to apply for funding, I should say. Currently, some other upcoming events we have the G318 Local Mitigation Planning course coming up at the end of September. So if that's something that you're interested in, you can always reach out to see if that's something you might be interested in participating in. And then we're also always looking for other opportunities. If you want to pair up with like an entity or organization, or conduct a workshop or anything like that. If you want to host an opportunity, whether it just be for grant opportunities in general, or something specific for hazard mitigation, or how to better apply or make your application stand out more, et cetera, we're always welcome to feedback or potential opportunities like that. And then these are the people on our team. We are small but mighty. You can contact any one of us. And then we've got our collective hazard mitigation inbox. You are always welcome to reach out with questions. And I mean, that's pretty much all I have to say at the moment. Here's some links to some resources, our website again, as well as the guidance for a lot of the hazard mitigation grants.
Okay. Yeah, again, here is our contact information. You really can't go wrong who you send your inquiries to. Our departments work together very closely. So if you just have some question, like we'll get you to the right spot. We'll get you answered. It's our job. One request from us is from Department of Natural Resources is if you are a floodplain administrator and you're on this call, please complete FEMA's floodplain administrators survey. They're taking a nationwide, making a nationwide survey effort to find out what floodplain administrators need in terms of education resources. We want strong representation from Nebraska. So we've got, so that FEMA is hearing from rural communities with riverine flooding. You know, the coastal communities get a lot of attention, but we have flooding here, and we would like some more resources. So please do fill out this survey.